And you can't even drive? I can. Are you stupid, eh? Are you a stupid fool? Well, why can't you drive then? You can't even drive! A bit grey today, isn't it?
I'm here. Get your Nescafe Golds to the ready. Get your weak lemon drink to hand. Because it's time once again for the deepest lore. And I'm welcoming back Mr. D. How you doing, Mr. D? It's been about a month since the last part of Andy Warhol due to various circumstances.
Do you know who else couldn't drive?
Go on.
Andy Warhol.
Well, I suppose if he lived in New York all his life, wouldn't he?
No.
Just catch the subway, as they say.
Oh dear, oh dear.
So let's.
Well, when he was alive, that was not really the mostly the opportune time to take the subway in New York. I would say
you could have been stabbed today.
Yeah, the 70s and 80s was not the best time, but you know, I think he'd afford a cab.
Yeah, let me just. I have forgotten to send the final tweet out, so I'll do that in a second.
Oh, okay.
People trickle in just as we're getting going. Remember, there's a sale on at the Academic Agency. Autumn 25 gets 25% off all courses. Mrs. AA signed up the other day. Obviously, she got all the courses for free, but she has need of doing. She actually has need of doing foundations of research.
Amazing.
And is doing it like as a legitimate. She's doing a course, and she's like, "Yeah, we need to know how to research." So now she, for the first time in her life, she's going to actually listen to me for once.
I would have charged her.
Well, it's good because you can't argue with the
right, exactly.
Can't argue with the course.
with the course, yeah. Oh.
Hold on, live. Hold on. Yeah, I'll just say once again, thank you for everyone who took part in Evila Day yesterday. Some fantastic contributions. Panama Hat, very good. Charlie made a fantastic video. Prudentialist. Frody, Philosophy Cat, Philosophica. Who else? John Morgan.
Yeah.
Evelyn Narrow McIntyre. The pastor.
I haven't caught up with all the material.
I mean, the thing is, I'm gonna keep it up there. So the idea is that if anybody wants to get into Evila, it's all there, laid out, all in a row, for people. And there is a playlist. So, yes. Okay. Sent that out now. And very quickly, I'll do it on here as well. So many little bits of fiddle with these days, isn't there? I wish there was a button that could automate it all, If anyone
that's why you need a personal assistant. I mean, come on. I've sent out 2 tweets. I'm all ready to go. Look how professional I am. Come on, agent.
I get to A Lodge, finally.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to put this full screen. So that should be large now on your screens. Go. Oh. How can I stop it auto slide showing in that way?
I don't know. Is there not an option to do that? Turn off auto. It's amazingly professional setup we have here. Is that working? You had a nice black background before. How come it's like white and ugly now?
You see it? Look, I can set it to that, but it tries to.
How about settings? What if you go to settings? Is there a pause button? Is there like a little pause button?
I don't know.
No, go to settings and see if there's a setting.
All right. Well, maybe if it flicks on, I'll just flick it back again.
Oh, no. You're not going to be able to do that the whole stream. There's like 300 images. It's going to drive you insane.
We may have to
push the
can't figure out how
space.
to do it.
Try pushing the space bar. Does anyone in the chat know? This is a real professional setup we've got going here. Does anyone in the chat know? Slideshow. Go to slideshow.
I've done
turn
that,
that off?
but it kind of it
push
wants
push
to-
the. See, on the Mac you can push the space bar and it will stop doing that. No,
Oh, well, maybe it's paused it.
has that paused it?
Well, yeah, I think so.
Okay, and then you can push the arrow key to go to the next one. Is that correct?
Yeah,
Right
looks
arrow.
like it. Okay.
Oh,
Yes.
good.
We're in business. It only
Oh,
took
my
20 minutes. Oh,
Goodness. No!
no! Okay.
Oh.
Anyway, tell me about this image, D.
Okay. Excuse me. So we finished up last time with the kind of later 1970s, and so this leaves us this is about 1976, and this is a painting by an artist called Jamie Wyeth. Jamie Wyeth is from a very sort of well-known family of American artists, the Wyeths. His grandfather was J.C. Wyeth. His father was Andrew Wyeth, another very well-known sort of artist. They were all kind of realist artists. They have a whole kind of compound in Chaddsford, Pennsylvania, I think is where it is. But in the sort of mid-1970s, he and Warhol became acquainted, and for a period of time, Jamie Wyeth actually used a small spot in Warhol's studio at 860 Broadway to do some portrait paintings in New York. So he was kind of they were kind of art bros, and in fact, I think Jamie Wyeth famously painted a portrait of Arnold Schwarzenegger doing a bodybuilding pose, again in this realist style. So a very odd kind of combination, but he and Jamie Wyeth remained friends throughout.
It reminds me of that portrait of Dorian Gray that's in the Chicago Art Institute. The famous one, because of the you can see all the pock marks in his skin. And
well, it's a very uncompromising portrait. I mean, again, I think Jamie Wyeth was sort of well known for for being a quite capable sort of observational artist in a realist style. But again, doing portraits that I would say honest and probing rather than flattering. So yes, and I think it's a very accurate. I mean, it really does convey kind of Warhol's peculiar appearance, certainly at that time. And also you'll notice that he's holding a small dog. So around this time, another famous kind of member of the Warhol milieu entered the scene, and that was Archie the Dachshund. So Warhol acquired 2 Dachshunds who were with him for the rest of his life. And they pop up quite a lot. I've actually included if you go to the next slide. This is a drawing by Jamie Wyeth of again War. Oh,
God. I have to press it every time. Okay, go on.
Okay, the drawing of Warhol and Archie. But so the Dachshunds crop up, and actually coincidentally at this period, Warhol sort of expanded his commercial enterprise to doing portraits of pets as well as portraits of people. So you want to go on? There's Warhol and Archie.
Like a Dachshund. Do you want me to carry on?
Yeah.
There's Lou Reed with the Dachshund.
There's Lou Reed with Archie and Amos.
He's taking a walk on the wild side.
Yeah. So the Dachshunds crop up in lots of hilarious situations. When you read the diary, which we sort of began to refer to last week, because the diary begins in 1970. 1976, the end of 1976, I believe. There's lots of hilarious Dachshund anecdotes, in the diary. So I'm going to go to the next one. So this is one of Warhol's portraits of Archie. So he again, as I said, expanded his his commercial enterprise. Again, if you're going to paint portraits of people, you could also offer your services as a pet portraitist. And he had a show around this time in London, I believe. And I want to watch a video because it gives a very good impression of kind of Warhol's personality at this point in the 1970s. So if you want to go to the videos.
Yes, let me get to that. We have to do that online. So,
okay. And the video is called Pets, Thames TV, 1976. This video is I showed this to a few people, and the first thing that they said was Warhol was a just complete autist. And that wasn't a kind of popular kind of pop diagnosis at the time, but I would certainly say in retrospect that a lot of the characteristics that people sort of associate with Asperger's syndrome, autism spectrum, it does make sense in a weird way with Warhol. So watch this and tell me we see. But also notice how he uses his complete sort of idiot routine to kind of play with this journalist who's basically making fun of him, and how he sort of turns, in the way that we saw in the 1960s, how he kind of turns that back around on them in a kind of totally seemingly passive way, but actually quite innovating and aggressive in another way. So go on.
Why did you decide to do pets?
Well, I got tired of doing people.
Did you?
Yeah.
Have you gone off people?
No, but I have some dogs, and I just thought I'd paint.
Have you? What? You've got 2 dogs of your own?
Yeah, one. They're called Amos.
What sort of dogs?
They're Dachshunds.
Are they in the collection here?
Yeah, I think they're over there, or downstairs or something.
Now, for people not familiar with the way you go about it, how did you actually do them? What's the process involved?
Well, I take a photograph, and then I blow up the photograph, and then paint on the photograph, and then screen over the photograph.
Would it matter who took the photograph?
Well, gee, I like to meet the dog, so I always take the photograph.
So what happens now? People, if they want a portrait of their animal, can commission you?
Yeah.
And what? This is the first one?
Yeah, this is the first one. It's the nicest dog I've ever met.
When will you do it?
It's nicer than my dog.
Is it?
Yes.
Do you work hard? I mean, I suspect...
Well, I just work all the time.
All the time? I suspect a lot of people think you maybe just snap a few Polaroids, blow them up, and splash a bit of paint on, but...
No, we have a newspaper, and I have to do a lot of interviews. And I never know what to ask, so that's hard work for me.
Are there any famous people you haven't met you'd like to meet?
No.
You met them all?
No. Just some nice horses.
Some nice horses you haven't met yet?
Yeah.
You like meeting animals?
Well, horses.
Horses more than...
Yeah. They're great.
I got in. It was subtle, but when he said I've got a newspaper, I got to run. Where I just had to come up with questions, and that's hard work. That was quite a. She just kind of went over her head, but
yeah. I mean, well, that's what I mean. Again, I mean, playing his usual role of the kind of stumble-brained, kind of idiot in interviews, but I mean, he was also roasting her, and of course you could tell the moment that he went from basically just sincerely answering the questions to kind of fucking with her. Are there any famous people you want to meet? No. I like horses.
Right. Okay. We have got back to more pictures of dogs.
Excuse me. So yes, but a very peculiar fellow. And now I also want to caution people, because there's an idea that is how he acted, in life when he wasn't away from the cameras, and that's not true at all. He was apparently a very different person, quite loquacious, and certainly, I see this all the time. He's dumb, 85 IQ apparently. I've seen this information again and again and again. I mean, first of all, he never took a public IQ test, and certainly would never reveal the results. And also, he wasn't 85 IQ. That's just a stupid thing. I mean, again, he had a persona which he kept up in a very specific way over the years. It changed. Now, this was the kind of transition period, and his quite standoffish, hostile approach to media changed, I think, pretty much starting in the 70s and moving on into the 80s. So, but yeah, I mean, don't assume that this is how he was all the time. This was very much the public-facing Warhol.
Yeah. So should we? Okay. I found a way to do it, by the way. We don't get the nice black background, but I still think this is better than having to try to hit the space bar all the time like some low-grade arcade game. So here's Muhammad Ali.
Yeah, so this is around 1976. He was commissioned by a friend and collector of his called Richard Wiseman to do portraits of various athletes. And so, of course, we talked about the process by which Warhol did his portraits. Yeah, hang on. I'm just trying to deal with something here. We talked about the way he did his portraits, and so these were done in the same way. I mean, basically, they arranged meetings for Warhol with the various subjects of the portraits, Ali and others, as we'll see. And Warhol did the Polaroids and did these portraits to fulfill this commission. So if you want to, you sort of go on. So this is another famous fellow, O.J. Simpson. Yeah. This is an American baseball player called Tom Seaver.
Okay.
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So really, it's a kind of cavalcade of some, sort of really the biggest kind of professional athletes of that period.
Pele,
yeah.
He would have been playing for was a team called like the New York All Stars or Metro Stars or something at that time.
Right.
I think he played in New York. Yeah. Who's this?
This is a famous figure skater called Dorothy Hamill, who I believe was an Olympic skater at the time.
Okay.
And this is Jack Nicklaus, pro golfer.
Yeah, famous golfer.
And this is Chris Everett, tennis player. So they're also they're very much in Warhol's kind of 1970s style with the slightly kind of jangling colors, sort of color contrasts. Done very much with using Warhol. Warhol used his fingers to do a lot of these, to do the kind of background transitions in these paintings. So if you'll see where, if you look on these portraits, where the green and the purple and the red and such, where it sort of interfaces into the pink of the general pink of the background, there's a kind of smears and the blurring and such, which Warhol would do with his fingers. So that was very much a kind of mark of the paintings of this time.
Yeah,
and you want to go to look.
I should correct myself. It's the New York Cosmos, not the Metros. I don't know why the football team for New York, the soccer team, changes its name like every decade, it seems. So okay.
Next, yeah, and this is Willie Shoemaker, a famous jockey. I quite like these. And And these aren't. I put some of these images together, so these are full separate paintings, but again, I think these are really nice. I think the kind of color harmonies in these are great, and again, the contrast between the mechanical silk screen and the kind of finger work and blending. These I think are very successful. So I don't know how successful these paintings were at the time, because I do know that that quite a number of them were sold, but Richard Wiseman died a couple of years ago, and as part of his estate, there was an auction at Christie's selling off a huge number of these. So Wiseman had commissioned this series and ended up sort of keeping a lot of these paintings, and they went for an enormous amount of money, especially the Ali painting. I can't remember, something on the order of $20 million for
Wow.
that red and yellow Ali painting, which is a great one.
I want to say this jockey looks like a nice guy. He's got kind eyes. Comes across in this portrait. I think,
Oh yeah,
this
and
is
actually,
kind of a nice looking guy.
if you see the Polaroids that were taken during these sessions, I mean, it's clear that most of the athletes had quite a lot of fun. I think Warhol mentions this guy had come to the photographic session with his ex-wife for some reason, and so there was a very interesting dynamic going on there. But it's quite curious, the kind of interaction between Warhol and these athletes. So this was sort of the big portrait commission of the kind of mid 1970s.
That's President Jimmy Carter, isn't it?
So around this time, now, as I said in past streams, Warhol didn't directly get involved with politics very much. He was a registered Democrat, and those are certainly where his sympathies lie, in the kind of old style of the Democrat Party in the United States. But he was commissioned by someone to do portraits of Carter for the election campaign, and so at some point he went to Washington D.C. to meet Carter and various members of the Carter family, and do portraits of Carter to use as campaign material. So it was again one of his few forays directly into politics, which he did solely because it was commissioned. But you recall Warhol was forever suspicious that his Vote McGovern image of Nixon that he'd done in 1972 was the reason that the IRS audited him every year of his life until his death. So he was quite circumspect when getting directly involved in politics. This portrait of Carter, you can't see it very well. This is a drawing based on a couple of the photographs that were taken during those sessions, and it's one of the worst Warhols, I would say. It's really a nadir of, partially because Carter is not the most, I would say, not the most photogenic character, but the drawings just didn't work out. If you go to the next one, you can see the actual paintings that he did for the campaign posters. They're a little bit better, but they're still, I think they're still not particularly great.
Kind of cursed, these.
Yeah. So just it's again that Carter was apparently famous for that sort of weird anodyne smile. So so Warhol, as the 70s turned to the 80s, Warhol's constant sort of pursuit of both portrait commissions and sort of mingling with famous people, it kind of went into high gear. He literally had contact with the President of the United States at this point. So you will see a pattern of this as you kind of follow him into the 80s, where he was sort of with almost everyone you could think of at that period, and had access in one way or the other to sort of very high level people.
There's a comment in the chat that's amused me. Somebody said it's kind of a sellout move, to be honest. But imagine accusing Andy Warhol of selling out at this point.
Yeah, I mean, Warhol was a professional sellout. I mean, that's what he did.
Okay. Okay. So, what we're looking at now? This is
So
different.
another, so one of the, I would say one of the very interesting sort of strains of Warhol's work was that his work, of course, the work that we all know about was very much, rooted in photography. I mean, it was very plainly identifiable images, celebrities, products, all of these things rendered in a very flat, very, I would say, realistic and identifiable way. I mean, literally photographs of things. But in a way, there was always a question of abstraction kind of floating around in all of Warhol's work. I mean, when you repeat Marilyn Monroe's face, a kind of silk screen of a photograph of a reproduction of a photograph, how many layers before that goes from becoming a kind of representation to becoming a symbol and almost a kind of an abstraction for, an idea of this person or an idea of fame or an idea of a celebrity. And so there already was this kind of flirtation with the idea of abstraction. And so Warhol developed various bodies of work. I'd say beginning with this body of work called the Oxidation paintings, and carrying on into the 80s of basically what are called kind of non-representational expressionist work. So this painting is massive. This, another trend in Warhol's work as his career progresses into the later period is that he did lots of absolutely huge paintings. So, this painting is something like 18 feet long or something and 10 feet high. But things are not always as they seem with these pictures. So these are kind of grand, almost abstract expressionist work. And if you remember way back to the first Warhol stream, one of the things that these kind of post-abstract expressionist American artists were reacting against was the kind of establishment elite style of art, what had become the establishment style of art, which was Jackson Pollock, Franz Klein, Willem de Kooning, all of the so-called kind of macho abstract expressionists. This idea had developed in the 1950s that serious painting was, the kind of man alone struggling with his id and his emotions and his personal torments and his demons, and exorcising those with onto the canvas by throwing paint and slashing brushstrokes and these sort of monumental kind of images of human torment. And Warhol and the pop artists and artists like Jasper Johns and Robert Reichenberg came up as a sort of reaction to that. Here are these very different sort of men, some of them homosexual, many of them kind of bookish and nerdish, meek sort of people doing paintings of, Donald Duck and targets and American flags and, and Campbell's soup tins and billboards of Marilyn Monroe and all of these things, and so it was a kind of slap in the face to this idea that had developed of what serious art was. And so there was always a kind of tension between Warhol's generation of artists and the generation of abstract expressionists that had come before them. And so what's funny about this is, of course, that you look at this work, you would, if you didn't know it was Warhol's work, you would never suspect it, because it's very much looks like a kind of painting in the abstract expressionist tradition. It's very much, in the sense of the Jackson Pollocks, or even, if you pick one of the females like Helen Frankenthaler, these artists again using non-representational sort of these massive, kind of works of angst and torment and pure expression. But things aren't as they seem, and these are, I would say, fundamentally postmodern works. If you go to the next one.
I just wanted to mention that, to me, this one that we've been looking at, D, does not function like the 1950s abstract stuff. Well, it doesn't function like a Pollock. And the reason is because there is a sense of decay and rust in the way that, just because he's using oxidization, right? So it looks like decay. It looks like something, even though it's non-representational. It looks representational in a way that I don't think like the Pollock stuff ever does.
That's a very good point. Yeah, that's a very good point. I mean, I would say that they're referencing abstract expressionism, but yes, there's certainly something else going on. This is another one. So I'm going to tell you the secret of these paintings is that they're formally called the oxidation paintings, and as you correctly surmised, they are you are looking at an oxidation process. The canvases were painted with metal, with paint containing basically metal powder, copper powder, brass powder, bronze powder, reactive metal paints. And then Warhol used a substance that reacted with those paints that caused this oxidation. The substance that he used was human urine. And so the name that Warhol called these paintings were the piss paintings. So and again, this is the kind of postmodern punch in the gut that I think comes with these pictures, because they're extraordinarily beautiful and strange, but unless you know the kind of horrible truth of them, you would never guess. Yes, Warhol and his studio assistants, and sometimes people that would just come in, who would come into 860 Broadway to do business with Interview, or to pick up a package or something. Warhol would say, "Hey, do you want to come in back and piss on a canvas?" And so that's what these were. You want to go to the next one?
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
And they would sort of experiment as well. The late 70s was a time where people were kind of into sort of macrobiotics and vitamins and these sorts of things. And so a very popular kind of trendy vitamin cocktail at the time was B12. And Warhol discovered that people who were taking B12 supplementation, the urine produced very vivid results. Lots of kind of copper acetates and lots of the kind of deep greens and gradations and such. And so, certain people's urine would produce better results than others. So, but again, it's a kind of subtle and slightly nasty comment on this idea of, like, I keep going back to Jackson Pollock, but Jackson Pollock was famous for the drip paintings, where he was literally dipping a stick into industrial enamel paints and sort of throwing it all around the canvas. And there's a kind of implicit analogy there between the man kind of basically jizzing on the canvas in a kind of orgiastic explosion of virility and lust and angst and torment. And of course, Warhol's paintings are literally someone dribbling piss. So I think there's an implicit nasty association. But again, you would have to know this. And Warhol, I mean, it isn't as if this was discussed in the kind of materials in the gallery. Warhol wasn't the kind of artist who came out with an essay about what he was doing. This information you would have had to get from some source or the other. So it was a kind of, I would say, an arcane, an esoteric secret about what these paintings were. And besides being a kind of slightly abject way of making a painting, literally having someone piss on it, it's also kind of weirdly referencing kind of ideas of alchemy, because of course, if you look into the early history of medicine and chemistry, as it interfaced with something like alchemy, urine was very important. Urine was the kind of major way that medieval physicians would sort of adjudicate your health. They would examine your urine in a glass, and sort of the color and smell and texture of it would be how early physicians did these, did the diagnosis. The process of tanning leather involved using stale urine, which is why tanneries would generally require to be outside of the city walls, because they would literally just stink and reek. Urine, I think, is a very, should I say, loaded substance, with all of these kind of associations of the body and chemistry as well.
Let's pretend you put one of these on the wall. Is there not some kind of hygiene implications?
No, first of all, most people's urine is sterile. In fact, if your urine has bacteria in it, then that's generally that's an infection. It's not completely true, but generally urine is a fairly sterile substance. And of course, once it dries, there's really not an issue with it. The paintings, obviously they don't smell. I've actually smelled one. I've gone up to one and smelt it. I do think that they've probably been worked on by the conservation department. I do think that they were probably had a polymer glaze or something put on them, because the problem with using a reactive copper paint is that it's going to continue to react, and so these paintings would, unless they were varnished, they would probably have continued to sort of oxidize in just the air. But it also may be because the piss was put onto them whilst the paint was still wet. So I'm not entirely sure. I've actually asked the conservation department of the Andy Warhol Museum, but I didn't get a reply as to whether they knew if these paintings were glazed or not. But you want to go on?
Okay, yeah, more of this.
Yeah,
it comes through more on some than on others, I would say.
Yes, some of them are very much a puddle, and some of them are kind of less sort of referent of what they actually are. Next. This is one. This is a kind of a rare one that was done without the metallic paint. This is literally just urine on the white primer material. And the last one is the next one. So this really sort of set up this parallel stream of work in Warhol's canon at the time. On one hand, he was doing these commissioned portraits. He was doing, this time was the same year as the hammer and sickle paintings and the late skull pictures, and so he almost sort of had these parallel bodies of work going, which is quite unusual. Certainly was unusual for an artist at the time. It was sort of expected that once you became known for doing your thing, and so in Warhol's case, it was doing sort of silk screens of celebrities and soup cans, it was kind of expected that you would continue to do that sort of work for the rest of your career. And it's a big problem with contemporary art, that there certainly was, and there still is to some extent, you become very compartmentalized. You're sort of expected to kind of do the same thing. The same with Roy Lichtenstein. Once he started doing these comic book paintings, he was expected to do those for the rest of his career, which he did. But of course, he as if you're a serious artist, you're going to get very bored of that, and you're going to want to branch out, and you're going to want to explore new territory. And Warhol found a way of sort of doing that. Another artist I can think of that has this non-representation and representational strain in their work is the German artist Gerhard Richter, if people are familiar with him. And so he has very sort of distinct bodies of work, which are basically completely abstract paintings done using a specific process of squeegeeing oil paints. And he also does extraordinarily photorealistic paintings. I mean, they're photorealistic in that they're all done from photographs, but they're absolutely impeccably beautiful oil paintings, done in a perfectly realist, manner. And so he's a kind of still living artist that I can think of that again has this both hyper realist and hyper abstract bodies of work going at the same time. But that's fairly unusual. It was certainly unusual when Warhol was doing it. No one expected these paintings to come from Warhol at the time. And I would say that the late 1970s and the early 80s was a very difficult time for Warhol. His reputation in the art world was at a really low ebb. He was getting lots of terrible reviews. Again, the art press, in a way, don't want you to change. They don't want you to throw these strange curveballs. They don't want you to go off into these directions that may or may not be fruitful or propitious for your work. And so Warhol was experiencing that at the time. I mean, he was kind of, even though he was doing this extraordinarily creative work, he was also in a way kind of rudderless in terms of the way the art world understood what he was doing. And so, it was really a low period for him professionally at the time. So,
and of course he was uber mainstream, meeting the president and things like that as well.
Yes, I mean, of course, he was also becoming extremely famous. But again, it's sort of different worlds. I mean, the kind of broader world of fame and celebrity is a very different world than the New York art world at the time. He was living a sort of strange kind of splintered life in terms of one seemingly increasing area of fame and success, and the other a kind of savagery. Really, the critics at the time were absolutely horrible to him, and he was keenly aware of this. I mean, there's certainly personal comments in the diaries of him sort of dealing with the fact that he was just routinely savaged by the art press. And I'm not to say that again, he didn't occasionally deserve it. I mean, he, as we'll see with a few things, he had some great misfires, and he did some bodies of work that were just utterly disasters. But part of actually, making something worthwhile and sort of claiming new territory as an artist is to be able to fearlessly go in a new direction and take the consequences, that it's not always going to work out. It's not always going to be successful.
Do these sell today, these piss paintings?
Yes, we will come on to that, when we get to this kind of to the end of our discussions about Warhol.
Should we go on?
Yeah, go on. So this is another body of work called, these paintings are called The Shadows. And these are done with silk screens, the same way that much of Warhol's work is done. Except in this case, what the painting is a kind of mystery. So these were photographs that Warhol took in his studio, but no one really knows exactly what they are. I mean, the prevailing theory is that it's basically pieces of cardboard that he'd set up and lit in a certain way to kind of get these gradated shadows and these sort of interrelationships of shapes. But again, it was I think a very interesting idea. Here he's using photography, using his normal mode of representation, which is to turn a photograph into a silk screen and literally print it on the canvas. And yet the subject of the photograph is not known. It's not representational. It's not showing you anything that you can identify. It's no longer Marilyn Monroe. It's literally a photograph of shadows. And I think there's something very interesting about that.
Is it wrong that my mind went to a satanic theme, D? I see that little thing on the right as being some like vaguely satanic kind of creature or something. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, it's certainly possible. I mean, the thing is that these are, any time that the human mind contemplates, I would say, an abstraction. The most famous example being looking at clouds. Your mind. There's a name for this, and of course, it's just flown out of my head. Where
the Rorschach test, is it?
Rorschach, yeah. We'll get onto that as well later on. But there's a name for the kind of mind's tendency to see things in abstraction. Somebody in the chat will know that word. But so, and it's that thing of lying and looking at clouds and saying, well, that one looks like a fire truck, and that one looks like Benjamin Disraeli or whatever.
I mean, the other possibility. So one possibility is like a very skinny kind of satanic goat head, something like that. The other possibility is like the bellows on a furnace.
Yes.
It could be like one of those things,
Yeah. Do you want me to tell you what that actually is?
Yeah, go on.
So again, the way these Warhol paintings were done, the portraits and any of the other ones, is that he would first take the canvas and paint the background on. So we saw those portraits of the sports celebrities and such, where that he was doing the finger painting. There's those kind of areas of colors that he's blending together. Then you would let that dry, and then you would actually put the silk screen on top of it. So you would push the ink with the squeegee through the screen onto the colored painting, and you get the kind of contrast between the silk screened image and the underpainting. Well, that shape you see on the right there is actually ridges in the underpainting. So when he painted that kind of pinkish color, in the background, it's thick acrylic paint, generally put on with a sponge mop at this time. When he did large painting, he would literally use a mop, and so that's actually ridges of paint where the paint is sort of thicker. And when you do the silk screen over it, the silk screen isn't going to press down the whole way there, because there's literally like a ridge of paint. And so it's just a happy accident, as Bob Ross would say.
Hey, happy little trees.
Yes, happy little trees. By the way, thank you, Mark Antonio and Martin Webb. It's pareidolia. That is when your mind tries to see things in abstract shapes.
Do you know what I'm seeing now that Martin Webb said that? I'm seeing a representation of the fact, D, that nuclear bombs don't exist. All right, cool.
There's a cool one. Okay, so anyway, so the shadows, yes, and there's a couple of different images that he used for the shadow paintings. They're not all the same kind of shapes, but again, this is that abstract strain in Warhol's work that was going on at the same time he was doing the commission portrait. Volcano, yes.
This is all, I don't know, it looks like do you remember in Revenge of the Sith when Anakin and Obi-Wan have the epic duel? It's that planet. Yeah. It's that planet.
Oh yes, you have the higher ground.
You were the chosen one. Yeah. Okay.
Come on.
Yeah. Okay. I can see little mouse creature. Can you see that? Poking up from the. Can you see that?
So some of the shadow paintings that many of them have a kind of single monochrome back sort of underpainting, but some of them again are kind of multiple colors. So they produce various different effects, I would say.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. Yes. Indeed. Okay. Yeah, I can see a bunch of flowers on the left-hand side there. Can you see them? All standing almost like a field of wheat or something.
All right.
I've got the imagination of Theresa May.
Running through a field of wheat.
I can see a Somalian wielding a machete here.
So just pause in this painting. Do you see how it looks sort of sparkly?
Yes.
So this is something that I want to mention now, because you'll see it again and again in Warhol's work in the 80s. So he came upon this this technique through printmaking, actually, because this was something that was a kind of printmaker's technique, and it's called diamond dust. It's not actually diamond dust. It's glass. It's a very carefully graded particulate glass, and so when you print with the silkscreen ink, it's an oil based. Generally, he used an oil based ink, a spirit based ink. Then you would sort of cast this ground glass onto the wet ink, and then sort of shake it around, and then bump the painting so that it falls off, and it leaves behind a layer of this ground glass on the where you had the wet paint, and of course that's going to stick and it's going to dry. And so he used this technique on lots of different bodies of work, and so you will often see these paintings, like they'll be called like diamond dust shadows, diamond dust whatever it's used upon. So of course it's difficult to see in the photographs, but when you see them in person, as you move around, as you sort of walk around and the light hits it in different ways, they glitter and sparkle. I just wanted to mention that effect because you'll see it again and again.
It reminds me of the flooring of this awful hotel I stayed in once. It was like remember there was EasyJet. At one point they did this thing called Easy Hotel, and for work I had to stay in London overnight for one reason, and I was just wanted the cheapest room I could find. I ended up staying, and they had flooring that looked like this. It was horrible. It was worse than sleeping on the curb. I might as well have been homeless that night. That's how bad the hotel room was. But anyway, let's carry on. I've been reading the comments of people. Somebody said Easter Island in the snow. I can see that. The Easter Island statues, yeah. Okay.
So
cool. Yes.
Warhol had some he as I said, one of his patrons and collectors were the de Menil family, who were Houston oil rich, and Dominique de Menil. There are other members of the family, and one of her, I believe, her daughters married a man called Heine Friedrich, I think it was his name. But they had started an art organization called the Deer Foundation in New York, which was sort of dedicated to, I would say, abstraction, kind of contemplative art, a very sort of specific style. They kind of champion a lot of the kind of minimalist artists of the 1970s, the earth artists like Robert Smithson and such. And so they would kind of commission artists to do these projects. Of course, they were this rich family, so they had lots of money involved, and so they had this absolutely massive space in New York at the time. And so, they would basically commission artists to do site-specific installation work to be shown in the Deer Foundation space. And so it was a good opportunity to for artists to do a project that would maybe necessarily not be something that would be commercially successful. Something that was a little beyond the scope of doing, work that you'd want to sell in a gallery. And so the Deer Foundation actually commissioned Warhol to do an installation of the shadow paintings. And so he produced 109 canvases. And I can't remember the exact dimensions of the canvases. I think that they're 4 feet by 6 feet each, something like that. They're quite large. and they are done in, you know, a kind of a random arrangement of colors, and they are displayed as you see them there, hung, abutting right next to each other. If you go to the next slide.
Is it wrong, Dee, that I see here different stills of God from the film Begotten stabbing himself? Have you ever seen that film?
I've not.
Well, anybody who's familiar with that, there's something. Yes, hopefully you can see that as well. Let's carry on.
Yep. So there's Andy actually painting one of the rolls of canvas that we use for the shadow paints. As you can see, he used the sponge mop for these large pictures. He'd started doing that with the Mao paintings because if you remember, some of those are absolutely massive. So it was impractical to do it with a paintbrush. So they're literally done with a mop. Also, I love that he painted wearing a tie and a cardigan. There's something very nice about that.
Yeah, they are pretty big. You can see.
Yeah, you can get a sense of the size here. Here he is actually doing the installation. He's got a big spirit level there, and this is the shadow paintings sort of installed. Yeah, that you get another view of them. I mean, as I said, there's 109 of them, and so they fill, you know, a massive space, and they could be, of course, hung in different spaces. I mean, the you know, when they were commissioned, they were done for the specific space that the Dia Foundation had, but they're displayed occasionally now in other venues, but it does require quite a large space to show all of them together. All right, and so the end of the 1970s, Warhol sort of brought these, you know, occasionally the kind of, I would say, abstract strain of his work and the kind of media representational strain of his work would kind of bump together, and he did this series called The Reversals. One thing that I want, you know, people to kind of notice, that I started the series saying that my theory about Warhol's work is that it's all about death. Almost everything he did, I think, in one way or the other, was redolent, you know, sort of psychologically or philosophically. The shadow of death is always present in his work. I think almost without exception. The idea of time passing, the idea of the decay of the body, the idea of a confrontation with God, the idea of the confrontation with yourself and your own past. I mean, literally, we've just looked at a huge body of work called The Shadows. You know, we looked at the oxidation paintings, literally the decay and transfiguration of a metal, you know, the waste of the body with the urine. So I do think that there's almost something quite medieval about Andy Warhol. And so I think as we go into the 80s, this strain comes to the forefront in a way, as we'll see in later works. The reversals, I mean, they're literally in a quite pedestrian, heavy-handed way. They're literally reversals. He was taking some of his subjects from the 1960s. As I said, you know, there's this great sort of anxiety that comes over a professional artist when you're trying to escape your past. You're trying to, in a way, progress beyond what it is that propelled you into the spotlight in the first place, what established your career in the first place, and to sort of go beyond that. And so I think it's very interesting that at this period, this low ebb in Warhol's career in terms of his critical reception, he chose to sort of do these retrospective paintings, but that they're literally reversals. You know, they're negative images of a lot of his famous subjects. Including the Marilyn reversal. These are sort of some of the best known of these works. And, you know, I mean, I think that the original Marilyn paintings were quite dark, and which we discussed on an earlier stream. But I think there's something even darker about these. You know, they're literally the negation of the image of Monroe, but they're also the negative, the negation of Warhol's own work. I mean, of this subject that made him so famous in the first place. And they're quite chaotic. You know, again, the underpainting is done quite thickly, and so the silkscreen doesn't penetrate. You know, doesn't give even coverage when it's put over the painting. So, I mean, they're literally, in a way, almost kind of falling apart. I mean, you know, they are photographic representations, but they're right on the edge of representation, where representation kind of begins to disintegrate. So there's something very, very interesting and very solemn about these pictures. If you want to go to the next one.
Yeah, they're quite effective, these. They're interesting.
Yeah, I really like these. Again, they were absolutely hated at the time. But I think in retrospect, they really make a lot of sense in Warhol's, the progression of Warhol's work. And go on.
Oh, there's the Mona Lisa.
Yeah, and so the reversals were, you know, as I said, he revisited many of his subjects, and there were quite a number of reversals of the Mona Lisa, which, of course, is a subject that he touched on in 1962. Let me go on. And, you know, again, it's Mona Lisa and her shadow, you know, and of course, if you can also take a kind of Jungian reading of this, the confrontation of, you know, of a man and his shadow, and which I think, of course, also, which is why I put this after the shadow paintings. I think in a way that Warhol was constantly sort of having to face his shadow. And whether it was conscious or not, I think that confrontation comes through many times in many different bodies of work that he did.
Yeah.
These are the Mal reversals. There's very few of these paintings.
Yeah.
And then he literally, part of this series, did these which are called retrospective paintings. So it's basically all his greatest hits on one canvas, you know, done either with so you can see that they're either done with photonegative reversal, or the silkscreen is actually backwards. So, you know, the cornflake box and the cow, you know, the soup can drained of all its color and life, you know, the flower painting, you know, falling out of register. So it's sort of hilarious that this would have been the kind of midpoint in his career. You know, Warhol would have been in his late 40s at the time that these were done, and so he literally created his own little mobile retrospective pictures as part of the reversal series.
Yeah, no, there's something. This is going to sound wanky to a lot of people, but I think there's something Spenglerian about this, because we've already, right, seen Warhol have, you know, repeat his main idea again and again and again and again. Okay, he's already deconstructed all of these at least once when he did the print series, if you remember.
Yeah.
But if you understand anything about the way Spengler says, you know, a civilization on its downward spiral, after it's rationalized, after it's deconstructed, it basically can't really generate new ideas. So instead you get this, you know, the endless repetition. But now we're getting to the stage where it's the repetition of the negative of the thing that's already been endlessly reproduced, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I just think it's kind of interesting how, like, he's still even at this point repeating and repeating and repeating things we've already seen dozens of times.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, almost as if to see if there is an endpoint where you can drain the meaning out of a gesture by doing this process, as you say. I mean, at what point does literally all meaning drain out of something? And then, of course, there's that weird crossover back to the abstractions, back to the oxidations. You know, at what point can you take meaningful images? I mean, Mao Zedong, a car crash, a literal portrait of yourself, and make it have as little meaning as those piss paintings.
People are saying, like, I can't understand, like, the significance of this, but just fast forward now to, you know, the past few years. We're literally at the stage now where you're getting, like, the fifth, sixth remake of Batman, or in the comics, like, literally, you know, 180, was it, you know, almost 100 years of people redoing the same idea again and again and again and again, or the you know, the 23rd Marvel Universe crossover epic, you know, and it's just like, so you do see this kind of emptying out of meaning, you know, the 22nd the 22nd annual X Factor winner, you know, who's now no longer doing covers of songs from the 1960s, but is doing cover versions of previous winners of X Factor.
Yep.
You know, the negative of the negative. So it does happen. Like, it does. There is. I mean, Warhol's doing it to himself, to his own work, which was already a comment on this sort of thing. But, like, it does kind of endlessly just spiral downwards if you think about it. So yeah. I hope I'm not
and there's something very dark in that, you know. I mean, I have a very different view of Warhol. You know, I mean, I think the kind of general public image you would have of these works is that they're, you know, oh, they're glamorous, oh, they're fun, oh, they're, you know, they're kind of celebrations of American culture. Absolutely not. I mean, I think that, you know, there is something extraordinarily dark and prescient about, you know, I mean, again, whether he was conscious of what he was predicting, I don't know. But I think he saw, in a way, what was happening and what this culture that he participated in with Glee, what it was turning into.
Yep. Total emptying out and bankrupting of symbols and meanings, and, you know, until in the end, it's the negative of the negative. Yeah. Here we are. Yeah, more of it. Poor old Marilyn.
Yeah, poor old Marilyn, poor old Mona Lisa, you know, poor old Campbell Soup. You know, you could see the yellow mouths lurking in there.
Yeah, and also I mean, we've been you know, one of the big themes on Evla Day yesterday was the fact that the fundamental orientation of capitalism and communism are not in fact opposites, but two aspects of the same thing. And the inclusion of the inclusion of Mao. I mean, we talked about how, you know, the Mao series show that capitalism was the ultimate force of subversion because it could even subvert the seriousness of the communists. But now seeing them all, like, pasted onto each other, it's also like, well, maybe we're seeing, like, variants of the same. Like, these are all elements of mass material culture.
Yeah.
In a way.
I mean, even nature. I mean, again, even with the flowers, you know, this idea of nature, you know, packaged, commercialized, and subverted, drained of meaning, drained of sublimity, you know, drained of majesty.
I mean, without getting too wanky, you know, if you know your classic deconstruction sign and referent, how far away are we from the actual tomato soup here?
We are at some point far away. How far away are you from a tomato? You know, yeah. You are so far. You are so far from a tomato, and from a human. You know,
amazing.
So here he is. Okay, so we're coming to the very end of the 1970s. This is another commission he received at the time. Hang on a second. I've got a note here. Sorry about that. Just trying to look and see if. Yeah, okay. I can't remember. So he was commissioned by someone from BMW. They had started this program in the sort of later 1970s called art cars. And so what they would do is, I think every year they would commission a famous artist to basically paint one of their cars. In this case, it's a BMW M1. And so Warhol was commissioned to paint this automobile. So he went over to, I believe, to was it Dusseldorf, where BMW is? I can't remember. So given, as you see, given a model of the car. Most of the other artists who had these commissions at the time, and actually after Warhol, they would do a design and then it would be executed by other people. But Warhol, ever the kind of contrarian, Warhol, famous for his hands-off approach and his silk screens and his assistants and all of that, said, "Oh no, I want to paint the car by hand." so he went over and did some practice work on the model, and then over the course of just like an hour, it didn't take him very long. He painted the entire car by hand using. Hang on a sec. Painted the entire car by hand, as if it was the underpainting for one of the the kind of portraits of the 70s. It was very much done in the style of the painting underneath the paintings that we've been looking at. So it was sort of very roughly applied, and the paint was sort of blended with his fingers. So we want to go on to the next one. You can see. And there he is painting the car. And there it is. So he was actually quite practical as well. He also painted multiple versions of various panels, the kind of wheel panels and quarter panels, so that if they got damaged, that they could be replaced with new ones that had been painted in the same manner. Because they raced these cars. I mean, these weren't just displayed. Part of the fun of it was that they would actually have these kind of rallies where they would race the art cars.
Pimp My Ride with Andy Warhol.
Yep, exactly. And this car is still around. They actually raced it about 10 years ago, and there's a problem with the ignition, so it's not currently operational, although it's still displayed. But they did occasionally take it out and run it, which is of course because it's worth an absolute fortune at this point. Not just because of the fact that it's a Warhol, but it's also this BMW M1 from that period. So it's amazing car.
Truly unique item now in 2021.
Yeah.
And also a relic of back when America had some semblance of culture.
Well, Germany.
It was a big scene. I happen there was kind of like I've talked before about pro wrestling culture, but this was a kind of indigenous. I say indigenous, a kind of uniquely American thing, wasn't it? The whole rally racing and the.
I mean, sort of. I mean, although again, this was entirely sort of commissioned by the BMW Corporation, so it was also a European scene, Okay. So to cap off the 70s, he we've discussed his production of print portfolios, and that remained, I think, a big avenue in his work, and also a big commercial venture as well, producing these multiples, and we discussed this. I think on the last stream, the stream before that, where it was very common for him to produce a body of work and then produce a print portfolio to go with them. Well, in the 70s, he started producing print portfolios that were just existed on their own. They didn't refer to kind of a series of paintings that he'd done. He was doing prints just for the sake of doing prints. And some of these are great. This portfolio is called the Space Fruits. I'm not exactly sure why he called them that. Probably because they're you know, they're kind of on the edge of being, you know, fruit still lives, and they take on a slightly strange aspect because of the coloration and arrangement and such. But you know, this is very much approaching a very traditional area of artistic practice. You know, the still life of fruit. You know, so he's sort of referencing.
Unfortunately, the peaches in the top left have been subverted by rampant Freudianism.
Oh, those are cantaloupes, by the way.
Okay, yeah, that's Freudian. That image.
Oh,
there.
I see what you're doing.
You see what I'm getting at there?
Oh, I certainly see that. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, you know, and then of course that's not lost on many artists either.
Yeah, and the one in the middle I don't know. This seems to be dripping with psychoanalysis to me. But anyway, which is an element of Warhol's work that is not. He's not really very not very Freudian in that way. But this, to me, I think, whether he meant it or not, seems to like drip with sexuality, even though we're just looking at bits of fruit.
Yeah, and again, the art press hated this work, despised it. You know, it's trying to be pretty, it's trying to be conventional. You know, it's just. I mean, Warhol's a sellout. I mean, you know, we joked about that earlier, but that was literally one of the issues. Look, he's just producing pretty. He's just producing pretty prints now. You know, as if that's a terrible thing to do. You know,
look at this guy in the chat saying, "I don't know, I didn't see any of that till you mentioned it. I think you need a break."
Lol.
I mean, come on.
No, I mean, come on, fruit. I mean, in fact, you know, the word fruit is used to the fruit of the loins. I mean, that association is ancient.
If you look at those cantaloupes and you can't see what I'm seeing, there's something wrong here, I would say, because it's just. Anyway.
I mean, you know, we saw the banana from the Velvet Underground and Nico cover.
It's my degenerate mind, apparently. Yeah. Okay.
No, I think that's an ancient association.
Yeah.
This is another portfolio from the time called the Grapes.
The Grapes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you know, again, you know, very traditional sort of subject approached in a very Warhol way, and I think these are amazing bits of design. You know, I mean, I know that again in serious art criticism, that's a kind of unpopular stance, you know, to say, well, they look great.
Hold on a sec. I have to go back here.
Yeah,
I do see the penises, AA. Don't worry, you're not crazy. I'm not talking about penises, you moron. Look at the cantaloupes in the top.
Minge.
Left. Fucking hell. You'd think they'd never seen one. All right, let's carry on.
Anyway, the Grapes.
Yeah, the Grapes. I'm sure I've seen things like that on actual wine bottles. I feel like.
Yes,
I think many wine bottles would have stuff like this on it.
I think some of Warhol's prints have made it onto wine labels and such. I mean, these were also. I remember there's an entry in the diary where he goes to a restaurant and he'd gone to a new restaurant and they'd actually decorated the restaurant with the grapes. So, you know, I mean, he also understood that there was a market for this kind of thing. You know, people could buy it for their kitchen. And these were cheap at the time. I mean, obviously they weren't, you know, cheap that, you know, that you could go and you know, buy them at, you know, down at the local shop. But, you know, relatively they were quite inexpensive to buy these portfolios. Now, actually, some of these works are quite rare. You know, the Grapes is a fairly rare portfolio, and you know, obviously goes for at least $100,000 or more for the set of 6. So. You know, so at the time they were a quite an economical investment. If you wanted, you know, sort of art by a well-known artist for cheap, but the prices, of course, have gone up. So this next series, maybe people consider this maybe one of the lowest points in Warhol's career. And this portfolio is called, and I'm not joking, it's called 10 Portraits of Jews of the 20th Century.
I was about to say they've all got something in common. And,
yes.
Oh my God.
So, and Warhol called them the Jewish geniuses. And so someone, I don't know if it was Warhol, someone in his association said, what we should do is we should make prints of Jews, famous Jews, because we can tap into the market of because there's quite an interest of people who would want to celebrate, famous Jewish people.
There's a pretty good Twitter account that you can follow talking about Jewish achievements,
Jewish contributions,
which is a little bit like this.
So people aren't aware, it's Albert Einstein, of course, Sarah Bernhardt, the actress from the 19th century. Then we've got Gershwin. And then on the top right is Gertrude Stein. Then we've got Golda Meir, famous Prime Minister of Israel.
Can I just say Gershwin is, if you read enough reactionary thought, Gershwin and jazz of that era are frequently a target as nodes of cultural subversion in various people point to Gershwin as a kind of malign influence in American popular culture.
Wonderful music, though. I'm sorry.
The thing is, we've all been I don't know. I don't see the issue, but I guess you'd have to get into the mindset of what America was like before then. So
yeah.
Let's carry on.
Yeah. Obviously, the Marx Brothers. Then that chap on the right is Louis Brandeis, who was the Supreme Court Justice in the United States.
Can I just say, poor Zippo, he's been left off.
Yeah, well, probably for good reason.
The straight man Zippo, always left off.
Zeppo, yeah.
Zeppo. Yeah.
Then we've got Martin Buber. There's a funny line where in the diaries where Warhol's talking about this portfolio, and he's like, where they were coming up with ideas of who to do, and he's like, Martin. Someone suggested Martin Buber, and he's like, who the hell is Martin Buber? He was a philosopher, but
right, yeah.
He ended up, and then of course Sigmund Freud, the godfather of subversion himself, and lower right is Kafka.
Franz Kafka, who was a genius. I mean, to be fair to him,
Yeah, I mean, quite a few of these people were certainly geniuses, including Freud. So yes, this was this portfolio was widely derided and criticized at the time. I mean, people.
For what reason?
Well, I'll read you. So this is a quote from Hilton Kramer, who's a famous art critic. The show is vulgar, it reeks of commercialism, and its contribution to art is nil. The way it exploits its Jewish subjects without showing the slightest grasp of their significance is offensive, or would be anyway, if the artist had not already treated so many non-Jewish subjects in the same tawdry manner. The Philadelphia
track on that critic, please. I mean,
the Philadelphia Inquirer called the show Jewsploitation.
Come on.
So yes, the idea at the time was that it was a cynical ploy to get Jews to buy print portfolios, and the best part is that it was. That's exactly why he did it. But there's been a reassessment.
But do you know what I don't like about that though? And this is a serious comment, okay? Which is that had Warhol been a Jewish artist, they wouldn't have said that. And this is something that has slightly irritated me about critics and commentators from that background, which is this blatant kind of double standard when it comes to things like this. But anyway, let's carry on. Yeah. So this has been reassessed now. How the reassessment?
I mean, yes, I think that people aren't as offended by it anymore. But I will say that it was probably this was a kind of very low point in Warhol's career, as I said. The very end of the 1970s and the very early 1980s. he was absolutely pilloried over this exhibition. I think it was first shown in New York at the Jewish Museum. There's a famous museum called the Jewish Museum on the upper West Side. I think it's on Fifth Avenue above the Guggenheim Museum. All right. So we've got some more diary entries for you. I've peppered a few of them through these things. You want to give us a reading?
Can I read it?
Yep.
Wednesday, April 2nd, 1980. Naples, Rome. Fred and I had to leave for our private audience with the Pope by 10, so we left Naples at 7. When we came to the outskirts of Rome, the driver didn't know how to get into the city. We had to follow a cab to take us to Grisella's office to pick up 2 tickets to have a private audience with the Pope. Susie was very upset because it was too exclusive for her to go, so she gave Fred her cross to have blessed. We got our tickets, and then the driver dropped us off at the Vatican. When we saw 5,000 other people standing around waiting for the Pope, too, I just knew that Grisella hadn't got us a private audience. Fred put on airs and went up to the guards and said we had a private audience with the Pope, and they laughed. They finally took us into our seats with the rest of the 5,000 people, and a nun screamed out, "You're Andy Warhol. Can I have your autograph?" She looked like Valerie Solanas, so I got scared. She pulled out a gun and shoot me. Then I had to sign 5 more autographs for other nuns, and I just got so nervous at church. And then the Pope came out. He was on a gold car. He did the rounds, and then finally he got up and gave a speech against divorce in 7 different languages. There was a bunch of cheerleaders saying, "Rah, rah, Pope." And that took 3 hours. It was really boring. And then finally the Pope was coming round our way. He shook everybody's hand, and Fred kissed his ring and got Susie cross-blessed. He asked Fred where he was from, and Fred said New York, and I was taking pictures. There were a lot of photographs around, and he shook my hand, and I said I was from New York too. I didn't kiss his hand. The people next to me were giving him a gold plate. They were from Belgium. The mobs behind us were jumping down from their seats. It was scary. Then Fred was going to take a Polaroid, but I said they think it was a machine gun and shoot us. So we never got a Polaroid of the Pope. As soon as Fred and I got blessed, we ran out. So there we go.
So yes,
would that have been John Paul in 1980? I think it would have been,
go to the next picture.
Oh, there he is.
There he is. So Warhol, of course, this was a thrilling moment. Warhol, so people should remember that Warhol was a Catholic, an Eastern Rite Catholic, and a practicing Catholic, which we will discuss in a bit, throughout his entire life. But also, of course, keep in mind that Warhol loved meeting famous people, and this is probably one of the most famous people he could have met, and so he was, of course, thrilled.
Now, Dee, just before we move on from this, I have weird nostalgia for this Pope. I don't know about you. He was the Pope.
Oh yes.
Pope.
I mean,
he was a Pope when I was growing up, but
yeah,
I always thought he was a good guy and whatnot. But he was actually fucking Catholic for one.
Yeah, he was an excellent Pope. Yes, and of course it has special significance to me because I'm a Catholic. But yes, John Paul II was a most excellent pontiff. So
and he was quite
and then Benedict XVI after him as well. But
yes, less said about the current Pope, the better.
Yeah.
So let's carry on.
So I think I've got another picture of Andy and the Pope here.
Did I ever tell you that my parents went to Rome and saw the Pope? They didn't meet him like Warhol did, but they were in the crowd. And when my mother was in the park, around that time, a guy, an Italian guy in a long coat, stood in front of her and flashed her. He was basically naked under the coat and then ran away. Apparently that sort of thing went on in the late 70s in Rome.
God, yes, that was.
I don't think it was this Pope. I think it was the previous. There was a previous Pope who was around for 2 weeks or something.
Yeah,
right?
Yes, John Paul I.
Was he shot or died? Or
no, he died. I can't remember if he had a stroke or a pulmonary embolism. I can't remember. But yeah, he died under slightly mysterious circumstances. That I do believe there's a conspiracy theory about that, but
Right, yeah. I will say, old John Paul was pretty good looking for a pope as well.
Yeah.
He had an
Yeah.
excellent spit image puppet as well.
I remember that.
Yeah.
that.
Okay, let's carry on.
There's Andy and the Pope again. Yeah. Moving on, Warhol. His pictures. Okay, so we are now in 1980, and this is a source photograph. So if you're kind of wondering, you can so the Warhol estate, and then later the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts, held on to most. So they held most of these, but then over the past, I would say 15 years, they've been selling them off. And so you never used to see these, but these are actually the Polaroid pictures that Warhol used to make the silk screens to do these famous paintings. So you can now sort of find the Polaroid sources for most of his sort of series of pictures. And this is a return to, of course, if you remember way back to Stream 1, to Warhol's roots as a commercial artist in New York. He became famous for doing commercial illustrations of shoes, ladies' shoes. And so he, after the Reversal series, again, sort of went rummaging through his past and decided to do shoes again. So, except this time to do them in a fine art context.
I mean, let's not forget who his next door neighbor was, D.
Yes, Imelda Marcos. Very good point. Oh dear.
Maybe there was a reason. Maybe there was a tie-in. Yeah. Okay.
So if you want to go on. So he
this
produced.
is starting to look very 80s to me. To my
yes, and I would say that the colors of the 1980s that people associate with the 1980s were very directly a result of Warhol's work. I mean, I think he was certainly responsible for the kind of palette that came in at the time. The Memphis Design Group. There were a few sort of inspirations, but I certainly think Warhol's one of them.
You see this color palette here. By the early 90s, this would have been like the wallpaper of a Pizza Hut.
Yes,
it became very ubiquitous. This kind of look.
Well, it is also interesting because Warhol's color palette has very distinct phases. So his 1960s color palette is, of course, very well known. Very strong primaries. Sort of almost psychedelic clashing of very bright primaries. Then the 70s, of course, we've seen he had various different palettes. If you remember the Ladies and Gentlemen, those the pictures of the black transvestites, those had and the Mao pictures, they had very sort of muddy, almost slightly unpleasant color relationships in those pictures. And then, of course, the athletes, as we saw, and the portraits, they would have these very specific kind of color harmonies, lots of pinks, lots of kind of pale greens and such. And yes, Warhol's palette in the 80s changed again. You'll see there's a very distinct change between the 70s palette that he used and his 80s palette. The shoe paintings are also all done with diamond dust, which I mentioned before, the ground glass. So they all are quite dazzling and sparkly. Even these black. I mean, it's, as I said, it doesn't come through on the reproductions, but even these black and grey ones are quite shiny and sparkly.
Now, how did the hostile critics who did not take well to his recent forays take the shoes?
I don't know, actually. I don't know what the response to the shoes was. Because I don't remember reading the press about an exhibition. I don't know where he showed the shoes. The shoes are quite well regarded now, and they're they go for a lot of money. The shoes are quite popular. But I don't really know. What the response was. I would assume, though, because just generally the critics were quite down on him during this period, so I would assume the response wasn't great. But I don't actually know.
Yeah. No,
And someone
really,
asked about the contemporary use of these diamond dust. Not that I know of. I don't know anyone else who used this technique.
Okay. Shall I read this?
Yeah. So I think actually this is just, I put it in here because he mentions real diamond dust, which we'll talk about in a moment. There you go.
Thursday, August the 6th, 1981. It was my birthday, and I told everyone at the office that if they even mentioned it, they'd be fired. Amazing. I like that. Bridget had wanted the day off, but I was Mr. Grump. I let everyone off 5 minutes early. And the funniest thing was that in the morning, Bridget went to the delicatessen, and over the radio, the DJ said, "And happy birthday to Andy Warhol, who's 64 years old today." So she was laughing that they'd added 11 years on. John Reinhold sent me 500 carats of diamond dust for a present. It's like half a can of tomato soup size. And he sent me 27 roses. Diamond dust can kill you. It's a good way to murder somebody. It's such an autistic way of writing. It's amazing.
I love his voice in the diaries. Yes. So yeah, as I said, the paintings, the paintings that are called diamond dust, those are glass. That isn't diamond dust. But he had a friend called John Reinhold who was a rich, involved in the diamond industry. And Andy was very interested in gemstones and jewelry. Andy had a huge collection of some very valuable jewelry, and he was always interested in jewels and diamonds. So it was natural that he'd have a friend in the diamond industry. But you can get real diamond dust. So this would be 500 carats of actual diamond dust, which would be the kind of off chips from the cutting of diamonds. And he's absolutely right. It's quite dangerous because, of course, if you inhale it, it's not even like glass. It's so because diamonds are so hard, and because the fracture points are so sharp. I mean, you can literally inhale it and it will slice up your lungs. So yes, real diamond dust is quite dangerous. It's a quite dangerous substance. It's also very, very expensive. I don't think he ever used it on any of his artwork. I think they're all done with glass. But yeah, he did have some. Okay.
Oh gosh, what's this now?
So this is another print portfolio, and actually this was also done as a series of paintings. So he actually did that sort of thing in reverse. So he would do a portfolio of prints, and then he would also do paintings with the same images. And this was called the Myths. And this is a very well regarded series for him. And I think I think actually people this was liked at the time. I think people were this was decently treated by the art press. This was 1981. But basically these are all kind of characters, most of which were sort of famous during Warhol's sort of childhood in the 1930s, very much kind of associated with characters, but all kind of myths. And so we've got Superman.
Now gay, of course, Dee.
Yeah,
it's been the big news past couple of days that Superman is gay. But,
I don't. He doesn't fight for the American way anymore either. I saw.
He just fights for bumming.
Oh God. Then we have the Witch, and so interestingly, most of the pictures in the Myth series Warhol took himself, and in the case of the Witch, he actually found Margaret Hamilton, who was the actress who played the Wicked Witch of the West in the 1939 film of The Wizard of Oz. She was living in New York. She was still alive at this point. It was 1980,
wow, yeah.
And so he had her come over to his studio and don the witch makeup and costume. And that's actually a photograph Warhol took of Margaret Hamilton.
Well, I wonder why she was looking so old.
Yeah, she still had it. So we got the Witch. Then we've got Howdy Doody, who was a marionette puppet who had a children's show, sort of like Rainbow, or...
Yeah, I actually know Howdy Doody, believe it or not, through pro wrestling. In the in the WWF before Hulk Hogan was the champion. Can you even name who the champion was before Hulk Hogan?
Was it Bruno Sammartino?
Yeah, after Bruno Sammartino and before Hulk Hogan, there was a guy who was the champion called Bob Backlund, right?
Oh,
And he
Backlund.
was
Yes, I've heard
Bob
the name.
Backlund. But if you look at pictures of Bob Backlund, he was a bit of a gimp, right? He was like an American, or like a nerdy kind of American college boy type thing, and people called him as a nickname Howdy Doody because he looks a bit like this. So that's how I know this from. So I know Howdy Doody from is Bob Backlund, yeah.
Well, there's Howdy Doody, and of course, again, as with Margaret Hamilton, he found the original Howdy Doody puppet, which was in New York. I don't know if he contacted the people who'd done the show, and they brought the original puppet over, and Warhol photographed it. So, which is quite interesting. I believe it's now in a museum in Washington. I think I've seen it. I saw it in I believe the Museum of American History, along with like Kermit the Frog and such. Howdy Doody is there. Then we've got Mammy.
No, who's she? Yeah.
So Mammy is a character from Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, which was a book in the 1850s, I think. And so, of course, as you've heard of people being called Uncle Toms. I think that Uncle Tom comes from that book. That sort of accusation of calling a complicit black person who's complicit with white supremacy. I don't think that was the point of the book at all. I actually think it was an anti-slavery book, but it's for some reason became associated with that. And I think Mammy was a character as well. She was a sort of a female slave in the book, and the Mammy character, I think, became very important in American culture. I believe that's where sort of Aunt Jemima, if you recall that furore last year, when they were removing all the black characters from every aspect of American life. I think Aunt Jemima was once a kind of Mammy character.
Could the Mammies do voodoo?
I don't know if that was an association there. I mean, they may have been.
I don't know why, but that image makes me think of voodoo as well. But,
well, I mean, yes, because of course the the West African contingent, certainly like New Orleans, and it is a big thing there.
I mean, and of course New Orleans is weird. Like, have you ever been there? It's got like a
oh yes,
kind of that voodoo vibes everywhere. Got like
everywhere,
a strange vibe.
Yeah. I had actually an interface with an old black woman who came up to me and said, I know that scent you're wearing, and it was an old perfume called Royal Bain de Champagne, a French perfume, sort of unisex perfume from the 1930s, and I was just like astounded. I was like, how did you recognize this? It's not like it was a common scent. And she said, I know, she said, people in my family it's used in ceremonies. And apparently this perfume is quite famous for being used in voodoo rituals. I had no idea, but it was a very strange thing that happened in New Orleans. But anyway, the Mammy archetype is also, there's a whole market for collectibles, and there's like cookie jars and
so would the one from Commentary be a Mammy, like Thomas?
I think she was sort of a Mammy character, but yeah, you can find lots of antiques of sort of Mammy figures. It's almost like the Gollywog, but forbidden now, so. Then we've got Uncle Sam, and then we have
Uncle Sam there.
Yeah, he's a very creepy Uncle Sam. If you look at the original Polaroid for that, it's a very, very creepy fellow. Then with the Shadow, which was the name of a radio program in the 30s. Who knows what evil lurks in the heart of men? The Shadow knows. But of course, in this case, you can see who the Shadow is. It's Warhol. So he made himself the source of the shadow, which I think is a very interesting tie-in to what I was talking about earlier with Warhol confronting his Jungian shadow. I mean, he's literally made himself the shadow, and he's put himself in the myths. I mean, he's made himself.
I mean, these are the collective shadows of the American people. Probably shows you just so fucked up Americans are. To be honest, but...
I mean, this is the pantheon of American supernatural kind of cultural experience, and of course the mouse Mickey, and Father Santa Claus. Then that is called the Star, but it's actually it's a picture of Greta Garbo from Mata Hari, a famous film she was in the 1930s, I think, early 1930s.
Cool.
And then Dracula, you know.
But not clearly Universal would have sued him, so clearly they've got that's not Bela Lugosi, is it?
No. Well, Bela Lugosi was long dead at this point anyway. But no, that's just some fellow that happened. I guess it happened to be around the studio.
Everyone in the chat is calling him Evola. We're calling him Evola.
Yeah, I remember. I think Panama Hat and I started that Evola's Dracula thing. I don't know. So I mean, these are the myths.
I quite like this. It's kind of weird. It's effective. There's something a bit creepy about. I don't know why, but I get creepy vibes from 1930s American culture for some reason. I don't know if that's because it's been kind of pathologized by postmodern culture or something like that. But there is something really eerie about this to me.
Yes. Oh, yeah. There is something unsettling about these images as well. You know, very odd color palette as well. You know, I mean, very heavy on blacks and very heavy on reds. You know,
there's something. How can I put it? Like, and the slight Halloween vibe, because obviously the witch is involved there. There's something so like, I hate to, something gaudy about American culture. Something like hollow and also terrifying behind that, because everything's already commodified and stripped of its. I mean, to come back to Evola, stripped of any of its metaphysical content, if you want to put it that way. So yes, it's a witch, and yes, she's a great villain in Wizard of Oz, but now it's kind of repackaged, commodified, made into a badge, made into a postcard, made into a image you've seen 1,000 times before, made into something that kids wear at Halloween, you know, and all of a sudden it's no longer, you know. And you can say the same thing with Mickey Mouse, you know. At one point, you know, something genuine and real and the product of Walt Disney was very probably a genius, you know, definitely a genius. But now repackaged, you know, emptied of anything, corporatized, made almost as a symbol of evil when he was a symbol of innocence, you know. And there's something, and you can say the same thing about Father Christmas or even Uncle Sam himself.
Or Superman, you know.
Or Superman, you know. And I think there's something really interesting about that. And that image of Greta Garbo down the bottom, I think, puts you in that mindset, because you're thinking, well, and even its appropriation of what somebody might call spirituality is almost like fake or a pastiche or emptied of its real content. And this is what America does.
Yep. And the other curious thing I think about these is that they're also, I was mentioning how a couple of them are kind of original. I mean, that's the original Howdy Do puppet. That's actually Margaret Hamilton. But in a way, you know, I mean, is this Uncle Sam? Well, no, it's a bloke in an Uncle Sam costume. Is that Father Christmas? Well, no, it's just someone he hired to don the thing. That, you know, who is playing Dracula there? You know, who's playing Mammy? You know, they're also both sort of abstractions of a kind of type. They're kind of archetypes as well, so they're not specific figures. I mean, it's like Warhol, doing the Shadow. Well, he has nothing to do with that 1930s radio program. But I mean, it's almost like they're all sort of stand-ins for something else as well. And I think your observations are quite astute, because, and it's very much it's very much a big part of Warhol's kind of project. I mean, there's this underlying dark character of what this draining out of meaning actually, what's behind it in America.
It's almost like it's impossible to be authentic in America.
Yeah.
That even the original idea of Santa Claus is now so reproduced, so bastardized, so commercialized.
Yep.
That,
well, I mean, literally the image, the image that we have of the American Santa Claus was designed for a Coca-Cola advert.
Coca-Cola, yeah.
It was Sundblom, I think his name was a Swedish commercial illustrator who came up with those paintings of Santa for Coca-Cola. And so literally the entire image, the kind of secular materialist shadow of Christ that has become the symbol of Christmas in the modern world is literally someone flogging Coca-Cola to you. I mean, there's something terrible about that.
Just from my understanding, did this appear as a series, or did it appear like this, or have you put this?
These are. I just put them all together. This is the print. This is a print portfolio. So these would come in a box. All 10 prints, and so you would buy the Myths portfolio. But he also did paintings where he put all of the images on one canvas. So there are paintings where the myths all appear in one go.
I just want to mention, somebody in the chat says American culture is just a crap version of European culture. I'm not sure if I agree with that. I feel like it's something terrifying and new, all of its own. There's a very interesting passage by Evola where he's talking about the image of the Italian gangster in America, and everybody saying, oh, well, that's Italians taking their gangster culture to America. Whereas he says, no, that is America brutalizing and criminalizing Italians, which is a very different way of looking at it. And I feel like there's something uniquely American about these images that he's showing. I don't think Europe could have produced something like this, that what we're looking at here. So yeah, I kind of disagree with that take. There's something uniquely American, because it's so disconnected from the original reference point, if you want to put it that way. The remnants of ancient Europe here are very, very dim. I would suggest. I mean, the Dracula image? This is a simulacra of a similar. I mean, this is like some bloke dressed up as Dracula.
Yep.
Many times removed from Bela Lugosi, who himself was a kind of Universal Studios imagination of some old European myth that many times.
Yeah, I mean, of a 19th century book by Bram Stoker, which was, of course, telling of an ancient European myth of unknown origin. And there is something about all those hops. Those hops into kind of meaninglessness that is quite scary, and of course with Warhol, the tension there is that he was also an Eastern Rite Catholic, and he grew up, as we saw in the first stream, staring at the iconostasis of the screen with all the icons of saints, these literal images which had power and religious mystery to them. But he was also the small child who was bedridden for months at a time, who looked through movie magazines, and so of course he had both the images of the real, the images of his parents' faith as part of his childhood, but he also had this undercurrent of what you say, of this strange American pantheon of emptiness and darkness as another avenue that was coming at him.
What I find interesting about this is that America doesn't just dissolve European traditions; it can't even maintain its own traditions. It's like the half-life. It's like the half-life of a cultural meme in America. You know, there's this guy called John Aber who's a bit of a nutter, to be honest, but he's known for doing these Spengler videos online, which are great. But you know, he seems to have like other personal demons, let's just say. But I've got a book of his here called Cultural Decay Rate. I want to say like the cultural decay rate of things in America is that much faster than it is in Europe, to the extent where, you know, barely 50 years, 60 years after most of these icons that you can see have been established in the culture, they're already like drained of their meaning even by this point. And yet America doesn't like it kind of loves to continue to venerate its empty husks, if you want to put it that way. So like we're now in 2021, and with the possible exception of the Aunt Jemima figure and the Howdy Doody, these same icons are still going now, you know.
Yeah.
They're still the same empty, hollowed out things, you know, stuck on the back of a bus or whatever, even in 2021. So yeah. Shall we go?
What are the roots that clutch? What branches grow out of this stony rubbish? Son of man, you cannot say or guess, for you know only a heap of broken images. Sorry, yeah. T.S. Eliot there. All right,
I might have to track down that Greta Garbo film. It looks really interesting to me.
Yeah, Mata Hari is great. It's a great film. Yeah.
There's Mickey,
and there's the mouse. So Warhol did some one-offs of the mouse around this time.
Did he not get sued by Disney? Disney are famously hot on copyright.
No, I believe that he actually had to get some sort of legal dispensation to do this. I can't remember. I do know that the Miss portfolio does cause a bit of a problem because in addition to, of course, satiating the Warhol estate when you deal with this, you also have to deal with both Disney and DC Comics for the Superman. So, but I don't know what what Warhol had to do, but I do believe that there was some sort of legal wrangling that had to be done. These go for an absolute fortune now.
I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine.
The mouse. Anything to do with the mouse. Okay, stop here. You want to watch another video?
Okay, let's do it.
So this video is from 1980, right around this same period of time. This is the one called Chelsea Hotel 1980. This was made for British television. I'm not sure why. What the full context of this was. It was a dinner. It was a dinner that was being held at the Chelsea Hotel with Warhol and William Burroughs, and this is very interesting because it's kind of a reappearance and a last gasp of kind of Warhol's 1960s milieu, and talk about shadows of former people. You'll see what I mean. So go ahead.
This is the first time I ever had hair.
Hair?
Yeah, I mean, it's really good.
Oh, it's unusual. Yeah. It's a rabbit.
It's a rabbit. Hair.
Well, what is the official name of the meal?
Well, it's supposed to be Lapin Moutarde, but it's not a regular moutarde. There's a lot more cream in it.
Where'd you find a rabbit?
They order it.
Really?
And on this floor, this is where Andy Warhol made his immortal classic, The Chelsea Girls. You know, Andy Warhol was originally a woman shoe illustrator who worked for Bonwitz, and then he painted some tomato soup cans, went on to fame and fortune and glory. Watch your step, a man here is trying to make repairs.
Can I just say, we were talking about American culture and the emptying out of meaning. Can you imagine this woman finding meaning in anything? Like just the way she's speaking empties everything out of meaning.
I hate to tell you, but that's a bloke.
Oh no!
That is a camp. That is a total. I was just about to say that voice would drive me. I could not listen to that man for 2 seconds. But yes, that's a bloke.
Oh no! Even worse.
That's a very camp.
So even worse than that, it's a simulacra of such a woman.
Yeah, leading people on a tour of the miserable Chelsea hotel. Yes.
I think it's a little wet paint.
Bill's favorite food is Texan food, though. I was talking to me yesterday. You like that food?
Chili. Well, I do like that kind of food. I won't say.
But not chili. The chicken fried steaks.
No,
stuff like
not
that.
not
what
chili,
are
but sort of.
I have one the other night. We all have one.
What is a chicken?
It's the
What
worst.
is a chicken fried steak?
And on the next floor, we're going to see the apartment where William Burroughs wrote Naked Lunch. Naked Lunch was quite an important seminal writing. When the first time it came out, it was considered very, very scandalous. Today, a book like that is really sort of hardly raises a blush on the cheek of your aunt from Dubuque, as they'd say in the New Yorker.
Can you tell me what chicken fried steak actually is made out of?
Well,
What
it's
is
just
the substance?
a thin slice of steak, breaded and fried very quickly.
Why does it taste like mush?
Well, it depends on what they start with, how it tastes.
Oh, right.
What I particularly like is the biscuits and gravy.
Right.
Gee, I never had a chicken fried steak. That sounds like a great
We can go to the Alamo
idea.
Cafe anytime you want.
Really?
And
It's
just have one.
actually a
Yeah,
steak
we
that
like
they
all
do.
these guys.
It's not really a steak, it's
No.
sort of a tenderized steak.
Also, I have no idea why Warhol is wearing headphones. Just sitting there having a conversation wearing headphones.
No, they give you a big chicken fried steak and a big thing of mashed potatoes and a big thing of some kind of beans or peas and
Oh,
stuff.
that
You sort of
sounds really
slop it up with a
great.
spoon
Oh,
and stuff.
well, mashed potato
Well,
and beans are my favorite. so.
But you can eat those steaks with it. They're very sort of.
Downstairs
Yeah.
in my office.
So we're right in the middle of dinner now. Tension here is pretty weird. Andy Warhol is wearing a pair of headphones, which he brought with him and hasn't taken off since he sat down. William Burroughs is looking fairly relaxed. He's wearing a beautiful pearl gray suit, and Warhol is telling him that he is the best dressed man in New York, and he admires his look more than anyone else's. Burroughs, slightly bemused perhaps by this kind of chic approach, has given Warhol a copy of his new book, Cities of the Red Knight, a proof copy.
What?
Wait, can you do drawings?
Oh, yes, sure.
What? Listen to Andy.
And has just signed in it and drawn a painting. Warhol is telling Burroughs that he should be a painter.
Oh, my God. Oh, more. Right here. Go
No,
on.
no.
Oh, my God.
And there we are.
Thanks a
You're
lot.
so lucky.
How great.
I'll get back to you in a few minutes to let you know what else is going on.
What's the idea of the play-by-play commentator here? It's
I have no
bizarre.
idea. I have no idea.
Oh, tell Henry to come.
He says the darndest
Tell him
thing.
it's really fun.
I love that completely disingenuous reaction that Warhol had to that Burroughs signing that book.
Maybe he'll think Victor's safe.
What do I find? Oh, healthy balance on the credit side. Got no diamonds, got no pearls. I like it.
It is Victor Bockris. Thank you, John Legrand. You're right.
Are you comfortable?
Yes.
I wasn't talking to you, pig face.
Big fish.
Maybe she's kind of pretty though.
Oh, really?
I mean, I never, there's kind of pink faces and being pretty.
What you mean
Somebody said absolute ashes. I think it's the ashes of the ashes, isn't it?
Yes.
is you have no taste.
Oh, do you like pink faces?
No, dear, but she's not pretty.
Oh,
You're not paying attention.
Gaga.
No. I don't know who's playing the guitar. It looks like Thurston Moore from Sonic Youth. But talk about haunted. Look at Nico at this period.
Is that 1980? Surely not.
Yep. Yes, that's 1980.
For some reason I thought Nico died earlier than that.
No, she died. She died in the mid 80s. Yeah.
All right. I know. Okay, so this is late. I've never seen a late Nico before. I thought she was blonde. Oh
No.
well.
It's all wrapped up in foil. You wonder if she can uncoil. Here they come now. See them run now. Here they come now. Chelsea girls. Peddler, she's having fun.
I'm just sporadically pausing this in case we get yeeted. Yeah.
Yes.
They're funny about things like this.
Thinks she's some man's son. Her perfect loves don't last. Her future dies.
Inherent melancholy in Nico's vocals as ever.
Oh yes.
In someone's past, here they come now. See them run now. Here they come now. Chelsea girls.
Absolute ashes.
Singing about my friends that were staying here with me. That's why I keep coming back here when I'm in the country.
You said to me when we first...
People are saying that Nico now looks like Shelley Duvall at the end of The Shining.
God's sake.
Which is a little bit harsh, maybe, but...
well, I mean, unfortunately, she was heavily into heroin by this time. So yeah, that haunted look. I mean, she got a lot worse looking than this as the 80s progressed. I mean, she was seriously in deep trouble.
Am I wrong in thinking that she was a blonde in the 60s?
She was blonde in the 60s, but she also dyed her hair quite frequently. So I don't know what her natural color was.
I am the person that made this hotel famous with Chelsea Girls.
I'm one of the persons. I mean, aside from the people that were that are now in heaven or in hell.
I would say Leonard Cohen also would have some credit for. Remember that song? I Remember You Well in the Chelsea Hotel.
Yeah.
Or not staying here. I am, I would say, virtually the only person that really has something to do with the hotel, in the sense that we've done the movie and we've done, I've done the record, and I'm still getting royalties from it. So I guess I am the person, the Chelsea girl, right?
Drop Archie's in a fix. Amphetamine has made her sick.
So dark.
White powder in the air. She's got no bones and can't be scared.
There's Bridget Berlin, who we'll see later, poking herself with amphetamines right through her jeans.
Jesus Christ. This is fucking dark. This is like Dante's Inferno.
Yeah, well, that's the Chelsea Girls, and that film was actually described as that. Basically, as visits to different cells in in descending into hell. Yes.
Which is also the motif of Salo, if you've watched that movie.
Yes, exactly.
Here comes Johnny Boy.
He is so dark, people are saying it feels like DJ Velvet Glove put this together. It's not quite that dark.
True.
He collapsed on the floor. They shot him.
Someone said, how can you be that fat?
I just saw that. It's amazing. I don't know. Bridget Berlin was the only person who was fat, who was a fat amphetamine addict.
Does that mean you have to eat twice as much? Or, I don't know.
Oh, she was famously fat. Well, we'll talk about her later, because she was sort of Warhol's oldest friend. I mentioned her on the last stream. She's the one.
Yeah, I remember,
she recently died. She died, only a couple of years ago. She was one of the last of the real diehards of certainly from the 60s that was still alive. And she spent the last years of her life doing needlepoint and knitting and watching Fox News. And
I hate to break it to everyone, by the way. There's no way we're ending today. There's no way this is the final.
No, unfortunately, there's going to be a final part.
Possibly even two more.
No!
Judging by the amount of material that there is.
No. We're going to plunge ahead. Still got an hour.
Up with milk, and when he died, sold him for silk. Here they come now, see them run now. Here they come now, Chelsea girls.
Very dark.
Yeah, very, very dark.
God.
Someone said, "Why does she sound German?"
She was miserable in the 60s. Bloody hell.
She was German. Oh no! I mean, well, that's why I said this was, talk about shadows from the past. I mean, she was really became a shadow of herself. So keeping on that theme of misery, I would also say at this time, if you want to go back to the images, Warhol. So again, we would have no idea of Warhol's kind of inner life in any sense had it not been for the fact that he kept that diary, which we talked about in the last stream. And so the diary does give some very important insights into him as a human being and as a person, apart from all the kind of images. And as reticent as he was to kind of reveal certainly anything of his character or his emotions in public, you do get hints of it in the diary. And I think that as I said, this was a professional low ebb at his life around the 1979, 80, 81, but it was also a personal low. So, his longtime live-in boyfriend, Jed Johnson, had left him in, I believe, the late 1970s or early 80s. And Warhol was sort of desperately trying to find someone else, basically. I didn't include any of it, but if you read the diary, there's a whole episode where he basically tries to force himself on, I don't mean that in a rapey way, but he basically tries to conjure up a relationship with a vice president from Paramount Pictures called John Gould. He tries to magic this relationship into being. Not based on kind of any kind of deep romantic feelings. He basically just wanted this guy to kind of move into his townhouse and just be someone to be there for him, And so it's very sort of sad, kind of watching the progression of that as you read the diary. But this was around the period where that started. Of course, it was all for naught. And it ended up in failure, as all of Warhol's kind of personal relationships tended to do. But I put some entries from the diary around this period that gives you a sense of his psychological desperation at this moment. So if you want to go to the next one.
Friday, April 17th, 1981. I was depressed. I decided to pass out interviews. After I did that, I went to the office and I ran into the Moynihan girl, Maura, who was arriving 2 days late for lunch, cab, $5. And now that the Soho, by the way, wasn't this originally meant as the expenses, which is why?
Yes. Just to remind people, he started the diary as a way to keep track of his daily expenses because he was audited every year by the IRS. So what turned into kind of one of the great narratives of the 1980s, kind of cultural narratives and great diaries, started as a way to keep track of petty cash.
And now that the Soho News had Dominique Sander on its cover this week, it'd be too tacky to have her as our cover girl. So maybe we'll use this Moynihan girl as our cover because she's cute and smart. She went to Harvard and she has a rock band. Chris Makos called me from Palm Beach, where it was so sunny, and he was with his boyfriend Peter, and that depressed me. They just gotten there. Worked till 6:30. Rupert has invited me to an all-boy party on Bleecker Street. Great burgers, by the way, Bleecker Street. But I was too depressed. Ate at the Brasserie, $40. Went home lonely and despondent because nobody loves me and it's Easter. And I cried. Fucking hell. Can I just say, $40 for at the Brasserie in 1981 that's pretty expensive.
The Brasserie was expensive. It was expensive restaurant. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. All right. Sunday, April 19th, 1981, Easter. I was in a really depressed mood. It was Sunday, so Jed had come and taken the dogs for the day. I cried 3 times. Decided to pull myself together and go to church. Jesus Christ. Was it hitting an all-time low here?
Hitting an all-time low.
Friday, August 28th, 1981. Then it was early, so John and I walked up to trendy Columbus Avenue, and somebody yelled "gay boy" at me, and that was funny. Then went home, watched TV, and took a sleeping pill. I woke up at 9, feeling so depressed and miserable. Oh God, I feel like I did when I first came to New York. I'm going through the same things, being afraid to live alone, and oh, what should I do? I'm down to 115 pounds, but that's not the problem. It really isn't. I look better thin. I guess I should try not to think so much about looks, but I'm not thinking too much about looks. I never do. I don't. I like ugly people. I do. And anyway, ugly people are just as hard to get as pretty people. They don't want you either. You know. Friday, November the 20th, 1981, New York, Toronto. US and Canadian customs are the worst. Conrad Black had sent a limo for us. Conrad Black is around back then as well.
Yep.
He's still around now, isn't he?
Yep.
He took us to the Four Seasons Hotel, and I had suite 2910 overlooking all of Canada. I got cleaned up and dressed, and we went to Mr. Black's office. It was a postmodern building, the kind with big columns, and there was an old-fashioned lady with her hair up at an old-fashioned switchboard. Mr. Black had read Popism the night before. He'd done his homework.
That's Warhol's book about.
Yeah, Popism. Sorry.
Yeah, I should have italicized it. That's the book about the narrative about the 60s.
He'd done his homework. He reminded me of Peter Brandt, but nicer. He was about 37 and sort of heavy, very nice, and a nice fortune. They have mines and supermarkets and newspapers. And then I dressed for a dinner Mr. Black and his wife Lisa were giving for me at the museum. At Gitana Ender's husband, Tom, who's the Undersecretary of State for Latin Affairs, was going to be there with Gitana. He used to be the ambassador to Canada. He's 6'6", and Gitana's 4'4". We met Gitana in the lobby at 7 and cabbed to the museum. They had a little TV crew there, and we were putting down publicity until we found out that Mr. Black owns the TV station, and they had a cardinal there who just had a stroke, so half of him was there only, and Mr. Black had him saying grace. Bob was having a good time at this. Finally, he'd been so grouchy lately, but the room full of billionaires perked him up. So
it goes on. This entry goes on the next.
So we're at dinner, and they introduced me to the cardinal, and he said, "I hear you have a nephew who's a priest." And I said, "Oh yes, but he just ran away with a Mexican nun." And when I said that, Fred yanked me away and was screaming at me, how could I do that to the cardinal when he was half gone and there were only 20 cardinals in the world? Why couldn't I have just said fine and let it go? And the cardinal would hear Fred yelling at me. And then they took him away and put him in a car, and he rolled down the window and said, Andy Warhol is such an honest person. He could have lied to me and said his nephew was fine, but instead he told me the truth, and I love his art, and I know he goes to church every Sunday. And then I was given a tour of the Gauguin to Moore exhibition. Henry Moore gave this museum all these plastic things. Nobody knows why he gave them so much. Really impressive, like 40 figures, gigantic. I mean, my work looks nothing compared to that stuff. Oh, I'm getting to hate all I do is tour. Everybody else works. I have to get back and do something. I might be well known, but I'm sure not turning out good work. I'm not turning out anything. I didn't have that much to drink. Drinking does put on weight, and I've got to stop it.
Just a little black-pilled Warhol for your entertainment.
Yes, very black pill Warhol in 1981.
Yeah.
And now he's got the knives out.
So yes, and so 1981-82, he produced a new series, and as I said, I mean, you know, if you take these specific series of pictures, I mean, he'd done the skulls, and then he'd done the hammers and sickles, and now he's done knives. And some of these paintings are enormous. You know, some of these paintings are like 6 foot tall, and they're very, very striking and slightly scary. Go to the next one.
Yeah. More knives.
Yeah.
Oh, I sense somebody's home. I don't know if you guys heard that.
Uh-oh.
Dear. Okay. Knives.
Yeah, so the knives, I mean, it's all of a kind of piece with this sort of persistent series of I think sort of violence and terror and death. You know, that was very explicit in these series from the late 70s into the 80s. I've got another entry for you to read, which leads into the next series, which went with the knives.
Monday, May the 4th, 1981. I had a death threat. I'll get to it. I ran over to Janet Sartin's for my appointment. She came in and said, "Oh, darling, your office called about 10 minutes ago, Vincent and Robin, and they said it's very important." So I called them back, and they said that kid, Joey Sutton, had called 40 times, and he'd sent me a note last week. Vincent didn't open it. I did. That said, beware of May the 5th. It's live or die. He's been hallucinating a theory that I stole Mick Jagger's song "Miss You" from him and gave it to Mick Jagger to record. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't even know if this kid really writes songs. He's disturbed. So after Janet Sartin, I went to Sporting World to buy a hat to disguise myself. I got a camouflage hunter's hat, $27. Made phone calls, $2. Called John to tell him someone was threatening my life. And when I finally got him, laughed, he didn't care. People were still asking for autographs, though. So I bought more disguises, $15.74. And then I cabbed to the park an 18th, $5.50. Robin was waiting for me there. A detective Rooney or something like that from the NYPD came over. And Risa Dickstein, she's interview's lawyer. She said that as a detective, we can hire, but I'm going to hire Augusto to be my bodyguard and go places with me. So here we go. So
Yes.
He's having to get disguises and bodyguards because he's getting death threats from this weirdo.
Yeah. So again, I mean, after he, you know, of course, was shot and almost killed, I think the threat of violence and the kind of fear of violence is something that he never really got over. If you go to the next image, actually, really quite soon, this death threat came to naught. Nothing happened. But he did go and buy what you see here, which is a bulletproof vest. He went to a place and bought a Kevlar vest, which he wore for on and off for the rest of his life when he would go out in public. Again, for fear of things happening to him, and you know, not only had he been shot, but you have to remember that New York was sort of entering a kind of nadir of crime, you know, just of kind of violent, petty crime. I mean, the city was in very bad shape at this point. So, you know, I would say that part of the kind of darkness that really explicitly enters the work at this time is in response to the kind of violence in both Warhol's life and in society in general. You know,
I have to say I've always loved wood-paneled walls, and one of my favorite films for wood-paneled walls is Blood Simple by the Coen Brothers.
Oh,
I like
yes.
it mainly for the wood paneling. You know, it's a good film as well, but yeah. Okay. Sentinel.
So in 1981 and 82, he did a series called The Guns, and these are again like the knives. These are enormous pictures.
Yes. Now, I hate to say this, given how depressed he was, do you think he was thinking about like methods of
I wouldn't want to speculate. I probably not. Okay, stop there. So yes, the knives and the guns, and these are also, again, if you see them in person, they're quite impressive paintings. So I want to move on to really a first gigantic body of work that Warhol did in the beginning of the 1980s. So you remember in the 60s, he had done, early in his career, he'd done pictures of money. He was basically printing money. Someone said, paint what you love. And he said, I decided to paint what I love most, which is money. So in keeping with this idea of a kind of symbol and the kind of degradation of symbols, he embarked on a series painting money again, but instead of money, he's painting the typographical symbol for money in America, which is the dollar sign. This is actually a very rare thing, which I'd never seen before, but this is the sketchbook where he had drawn the various dollar signs, which became the source for the silk screens for this series of paintings. And basically, it's just an entire sketchbook filled with his pencil drawings of various types of typographical dollar signs. And these were the drawings that were used to produce the silk screens in the end. So again, another thing that only came out after the estate started to sell these sort of private works off. I'm going to go to the next slide. And this became a huge series. I mean, there are hundreds of these paintings. There's also prints as well. He produced, very much like the sunsets, if you remember those. It's a print edition, but they're all unique. They're all kind of unique color combinations. But there's also paintings, and again, keeping with his desire to satisfy the art buying customer, there's dollar signs in all sizes, 8 by 10, 16 by 20 inches. There's huge ones. There's some that are like 8 foot tall. So there's a dollar sign for you. And so, literally, again, turning the idea of big ticket art into a very explicit kind of, you're literally buying dollar signs to hang on your wall.
Anyway, you dreamed that American culture would get to this point where people are literally just buying images of dollar signs.
I mean, your painting is just literally bling, bling, bling. There's your money.
I wonder if Ted DiBiase bought one. Anyway, let's go on.
Yeah. This is a massive one. This is a very large one. This one is about 8 foot tall.
Now we could pretend, or there is a reading of this available, that this is a deep comment on American fiat money being disconnected from the gold standard.
Well, that is something that came up with the paintings of dollar bills. But I mean, literally now it's not even a dollar bill anymore. It's not even a kind of tangible object. It's just a symbol for kind of money with nothing behind it at all.
Yeah, we've gone from the referent, which was already fiat money in the 60s, to just the sign now.
Just the sign. It's and. And there is something very interesting there. The kind of reduction of things to signs. Go on. So as you can see, there are many, many variations of this series.
What's amazing is that the person who buys this is literally handing more dollars to Andy Warhol. So it's like he's printing himself money.
Yep.
By producing this series, he's printing himself money.
He's printing himself money, and as I said, they sold very well. They were fairly well received, and people like them because they're very nice. They look very nice. They're very colorful. So I thought I would put with this series a run-in that Warhol had with a very famous person, and I thought that we'd all appreciate this given recent events. So if you go to this, you can read about
Friday, April 24th, 1981. Passed out interviews this morning. Had to meet Donald Trump at the office. Cab, $5.50. Mark, was there a price fix in New York at that time? I noticed a lot of the cab journeys are exactly $5.50. Anyway,
I think that the $5.50 was probably him going from his house to his office, so which would have been a kind of fixed distance, which he went at about the same time every day. So it makes sense the cab fare was similar.
Mark Ballet had set up this meeting. I keep forgetting that Mark gave up architecture to become an art director, but he still builds models at home, he told me. He's designing a catalogue for all the stores in the atrium at Trump Tower, and he told Donald Trump that I should do a portrait of the building that would hang over the entrance to the residential part. So they came down to talk about that. Donald Trump is really good looking. A girl named Evans was with him and another lady. It was so strange. These people are so rich. They talked about buying a building yesterday for $500 million or something. They raved about the Balducci's lunch, but they just picked at it. I guess because they go around to so many things where there's food, and they didn't have drinks. They all just had tabs. He's a butch guy. Nothing was settled, but I'm going to do some paintings anyway and show them to them. So I can only imagine what the Donald's made of Andy Warhol's art.
Can you imagine? Can you imagine? And there he is with Ivana and Donald.
I wonder what Donald Trump made of Andy Warhol. Yeah, okay. I can see Donald Trump buying a dollar sign, putting it on his wall.
Well, I'm quite surprised. I'm quite surprised Donald Trump he doesn't really collect art. You know, he has like some reproductions of like Renoir or something, but he doesn't really buy art at all, as far as I know.
See, in a strange way, Donald Trump is quite a Warholian figure. I mean, especially that picture of him with all the cheeseburgers in the White House. I mean, that's like pure Warhol.
Yeah, I tweeted out that picture with a quote from the Warhol philosophy book. So yeah, that certainly struck me at the time as well.
Wednesday, August the 5th, 1981. The Trumps came down. Donald Trump and his wife and two ladies who work for him. I guess Mr. Trump is 6 months pregnant. Mrs. Trump, sorry, is 6 months pregnant. I showed them the paintings of the Trump Tower that I'd done. I don't know why I did so many. I did 8 in black and grey and silver, which I thought would be so chic for the lobby. But it was a mistake to do so many. I think it confused them. Mr. Trump was very upset that it wasn't color coordinated. I can see that.
I can totally see that happening. Yeah.
Yeah. They have Angelo Dongia doing the decorating, so they're going to come down with swatches of material, so I can do the paintings to match the pinks and oranges. I think Trump's sort of cheap, though. I get that feeling. And Mark Ballet, who set up the whole thing, was sort of shocked. But maybe Mrs. Trump will think about a portrait because I let them see the portraits of Lynn Wyatt behind the building painting. So maybe they'll get the idea. I love the fact that he's just pitching to the Trumps here to try to get some business.
Get some business. Well, this is how it worked. There they are.
There we go. Now, who would have been that kid that she was pregnant with there in 1981?
It would have been Ivana, Ivanka. Yes,
Ivanka Trump, right? Yeah.
The wife of Jared. Yes.
Sunday, January the 15th, 1984. I was a judge at the cheerleading tryouts for the New Jersey Generals, the team that Donald Trump bought. They were having them in the basement part of Trump Tower. It was the final tryout, and I was supposed to be there at 12. But I took my time and went to church and finally moseyed over there around 2. This is because I still hate the Trumps because they never bought the paintings I did in Trump Tower. So I got there. And so I got there and they were already up to the 15th girl and they were only 20 left to go. Another guy had been filling in for me, handed me his pad and I took over. I didn't know how to score. The girls didn't look special because there was no spotlight on them. Once in a while, a camera light would go off and flash on one, and she would look good, but that was it. People like Leroy Neiman, who was were the other judges. He said he voted for anybody who could kick. Ivana voted for any of the girls who looked like her. And there were so many different kinds of bodies, some with big hips and small waists, some with boy-type bodies, and some really skinny legs. And there were big spaces between their legs. And this cheerleading would be just something they do for fun. They don't get paid. So they better get themselves a football player or they'll walk away with nothing. And somebody told Ivana she better watch her husband because she could lose him to these young girls. But then later somebody told me that he fooled around with all the girls anyway. Well, I mean, he was well known for grabbing them. And seeing these young things, and then a sophisticated lady like Ivana, you'd think that someday they could be like that too if they marry right. And they all had to dance to Billie Jean by Michael Jackson. So we all had to hear Billie Jean 70 times during the tryouts. So it was sick.
I flash forward a bit so you could so you could read the end, how the Trump saga ended up. They did all the paintings and then Trump didn't buy them.
No, Dee. I hate to say this, but you can hear the noise is building up in the background. I'm wondering if this might be a good natural break. We may have to have a part 8. We have to get up to part 8 in this series. But let me have a look for super chats if there has been. I don't think it has. Usually, Andy Warhol does not generate super chats. We don't do it for the money. Ironically. Okay, I think that I did see one, which I'll read very quickly. It's good. It's kind of I enjoy this episode.
Yeah, I think it's generated some good discussion about things we've been talking about anyway in these communities. So.
Vincent Augustaire says, "Greetings, AA. The degeneracy is worse than you think. They're indoctrinating children. I recently watched a kids' cartoon called Steven Universe. So there we go, and that was 100 Indian rupees, which in real money is probably like 10p or something like that. Thanks a lot. All right. Anything you'd like to mention before we go?
No, that was 94 images. So keep in mind that there's 307 in the directory. So hopefully we can finish next time. If we can get a good solid 3 hours, hopefully it will be the last part. I mean, the thing is, people would laugh about this and complain about this, but I would think at this point, this series is the most thorough, detailed examination of Warhol's career and life on YouTube. I don't think there's any other
possibly ever recorded by anybody.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything quite this extensive that goes in quite granular detail. I mean, I've included really almost every major work. I mean, there's obviously Warhol was quite prolific, but I have included lots of images. We've done a lot of discussion about things and about the cultural situation of the time. I don't understand. Even if you don't like Andy Warhol, I'm not asking you to like it, but it's certainly a very interesting figure. And again, the conversations and the ideas that crop up around this work and around the situation of the world and certainly America at the time, I think are very interesting beyond any opinion you have about the work. So I don't mind. I mean, I do certainly apologize for plugging up the deep lore for so long. I know some people aren't happy about that, but I think it's very interesting to have this, and I think it's going to end up being, as you said, probably the most thorough examination in recorded history
for posterity.
Yeah. So. No, I think we have very good discussions. So hopefully people will enjoy it, and we'll be finishing up soon. I think we're coming to some really interesting point in Warhol's career next time. So I look forward to doing that next week, I guess.
Yeah. I've just put out a thing on my community tab, which is the homework for tomorrow's cigar stream, which is the Principles of Parliamentarianism by Carl Schmitt. And yeah, so that should be an interesting discussion. I've got Greg Johnson, who's quite the intellectual, coming on with Endeavour. So a dangerously based panel.
Oh, the talking boat.
Yeah, talking about maybe too much red pill for YouTube. We'll see, but I think Carl Schmitt is somebody people should be reading as well, especially the friend enemy distinction, which I find it fascinating. We talk about the friend enemy distinction, and then people signal to you that they want to be enemy, and they're like, "Oh, why'd you block me?" I don't get that. Like, this is one of the weirdest things. You probably experienced it as well. Like, people signal. They're telling you, hey, I've got 4 followers. I'm only really on Twitter for you guys, but I'm also going to signal that I'm against you. All right, bye. I mean, what the fuck? I don't understand it.
No,
it's bizarre. So yes. I would also say. Autumn 25 is the coupon code for the extra long sale I'm doing at the academic agency, delayed by the fact that I've been delayed getting into AA Lodge, which is why you're still hearing AAA in the background and things.
I thought, that's right. Will we be doing the next installment of Warhol from the Lodge?
No, I won't get into the Lodge until still ages away. 13th, 14th of November.
Oh, tragic.
Yeah, I know. I've done all the paperwork and stuff. I own it, but I can't actually move in there due to idiocy from Janine from Ghostbusters. So there we go. So yes, do buy courses. Given that the double whammy of buying the Lodge and bloody taxes has left me eating super noodles, and
you're not going to the brasserie to cry into your $40 meal.
Yeah, unfortunately not. Yes, it's a good time to buy Foundations of Politics, which should be probably the best course that I'll have written to date. I reckon.
Do you have any idea when that's coming out?
Well, I wanted it to come out like this month, but the delay in getting into the Lodge has meant that it's been much more difficult to get it done. Because I need a lot of time to all together to write a course. But I've started on it. I have started on it. All right, and get out. See you tomorrow for the cigar stream. Goodbye.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye bye.